Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our esteemed panelists and our audience from around the world. My name is Christian Jahn. I'm the Executive Director of the Inclusive Business Action Network, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this session that convenes representatives from the development community and the private sector to discuss the positive trajectory of inclusive business to date, as well as the growing momentum and potential of inclusive business as a connector of social and environmental resilience and recovery. But before we go into this topic, I would like to make an announcement. We are also launching today the Inclusive Business Features, which summarizes the distinguishing characteristics of businesses that engage the base of the pyramid and closes a conceptual gap between the definition of inclusive business and also the plentiful evidence from the field. It will be online now, as you see on the cover page here. And the IB features, they have been co-created really by leading IB stakeholders, in total actually 17, as you can see on this brief overview. It was quite an amazing process to have really representatives from government, from private sector, from the company side, from the academe, from UN, from financial institutions, from consulting, from impact investors. It was a great effort and process, and we are quite happy that we can launch that today with a business call to action. And I would like to say a little bit more about the features now before we go into the panel discussion. Now, the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals as the overarching framework of development has led to common standards and principles being adopted to support organizations in the integration of the SDGs in policies, business models, and investments. Now, within the world of sustainable business models, inclusive business plays quite a special role. Inclusive businesses are commercially viable businesses that engage the base of the pyramid populations into their value chain and or provide goods and services to achieve economic growth and social impact and scale. Now, with the COVID-19 severely impacting the low-income population and increasing the urgency of poverty reduction, it is even more important than ever to support the promotion of inclusive business. And the inclusive business features aim to do this. Now, building upon the G20 definition of inclusive business and with the input of leading global organizations and leaders, as I just mentioned, this document really seeks to provide a more structured set of features to identify inclusive businesses more effectively and also with consistency, because that was something what we all struggled over the last years when we talked about inclusive business. What does it actually really mean? Now, let me go quickly a bit more into detail with the four features. First, we have the engagement of the base of the economic period intentionally. The second one is the financial viability. And then follows the scaling of the business model. And the fourth is measuring and managing impact. Now, the first one, engaging the base of the economic pyramid. An inclusive business purposefully integrates the BOP into the business by engaging them as suppliers, distributors, retailers, workers, or customers in a manner that seeks to generate net positive social impact, such as improved livelihood opportunities, increased income, or better access to relevant and affordable goods and services for the BOP. Intentionality is really explicitly mentioned in these features because it means the business purposely set out to create positive engagement with the BOP of its business strategy. Whether motivated by a business opportunity or a desire for social impact, or both, the positive impact on low-income population is intentional and not an indirect consequence. And now the second feature, the financial viability. We understand it as the ability of an inclusive business to survive and compete over the long term in a manner that is self-sustaining. It covers its cost and meets the needs of its investors, employees, and other stakeholders. Financial viability helps also to ensure that the inclusive activity is underpinned by a functioning business model, which is designed to be sustained over the long term. It also encourages the business to treat BOP stakeholders as business partners and or valued customers and not as beneficiaries. And closely linked to financial sustainability comes the fourth feature, that is scaling. Scaling refers to the efficient growth of the business where gains outweigh losses as the business adopts more efficient processes. Scaling is also the most effective and efficient way to increase social impact based on the company's operational model to satisfy the demand for relevant products and services. And now, considering that 4.5 billion people living at the base of the pyramid, they represent a $5 trillion global consumer market annually, the opportunity, but also the necessity to think big becomes quite apparent. The scaling potential of an inclusive business can also attract the impact investors as they seek to maximize the development impact per dollar invested. And now the fourth feature is actually on the measuring and managing the impact part. Measuring and managing impact is key really to promoting net positive outcome for the base of the pyramid. Impact, what do we mean by that, is a change in positive or negative outcome for people or the planet. Impact measurement is considered the quantification of changes in outcome for the BOP, while impact management is the process of mitigating the negative changes and maximizing positive changes for the BOP. And now through this feature, inclusive businesses get an understanding of their impact on the base of the pyramid in order to adapt their processes and businesses model accordingly. Now, these are the four main features you will find in this document that is launched today. And the document identifies the high-level characteristics of an inclusive business, providing a structure to identify inclusive businesses more efficiently and consistently. And depending on their role, users can also adapt these features to be more specific to their context. The users we see mainly from three sectors or areas. For companies, they can use it as a high-level framework as they develop their inclusive business. We have a lot of guiding questions also in the document for companies. For investors, they can use it as a basis for criteria to evaluate potential investees. And for policymakers, they can use it as a reference to create policy instruments, contribute towards an enabling environment for inclusive business. And I'm sure you will hear a bit more about that in the panel discussion that will follow. Now, the features intend really to further clarify the unique potential of inclusive business to build forward better and for private sector-led systemic poverty alleviation for the low-income population who are really most affected by the climate change as well as the COVID-19 crisis. So now, before I close, I would just like to thank once more to the working group members who contributed to the finalization of the inclusive business features. And at the same time, we don't see this as a final product that have to stay there now forever, but rather would encourage and appreciate if we receive your feedback and comments on the features as well. So now it's my pleasure to hand over to Saba Zobani, who is the director of the UNDP Istanbul International Center for Private Sector Development, and who will moderate the panel discussion. Saba, over to you.
Thank you very much, Christian, for these opening remarks, for the presentation of the inclusive business features. I'm pleased that we have a diverse panel of experts today within the inclusive business field. Mr. Andrew Lala, the Chief Strategy Officer at Ignitia, Ms. Camille Coutois, CEO at Business for Inclusive Growth, His Excellency Sokhum Heng, State Secretary of Cambodia, who's one of the policy leaders in inclusive business, and Ms. Susan Olsen, Operations Officer at the Asian Development Bank. I would like to invite each of them to share with the audience their perspective on the growing momentum and potential of inclusive business as a connector of social and environmental resilience and recovery. I also encourage that the audience write their questions to the panel in the chat. We will start with Mr. Andrew Lala, Chief Strategy Officer at BCtA.
Great, thank you, Saba, and thank you so much to Christian's opening remarks about intentionality of engaging with BOP. I want to thank you for inviting Ignitia to this event and to my fellow panelists. Very much looking forward to the conversation. Ignitia is a tech company that turns our weather insights into action. We provide highly accurate and hyperlocal weather forecasts to support farmers, agribusinesses, and those in the BOP to increase their yields, optimize input usage, and build resilience to climate change. Now, we'll hear throughout the day, I'm sure, about climate change being referred to as an existential threat. And we're seeing that through extreme weather events. I just got a flood alert on my phone. But these changes aren't affecting everyone equally. And it's creating massive upheaval for some sooner than others. In fact, our customers, we have 2 million subscribers across West Africa. Their livelihoods are threatened by climate change every season. And when we look at agriculture, which is where Ignitia applies our technology, it's mostly rain-fed and not very tech-enabled. Contrary to what we see in wealthier nations, US, Europe, Brazil, parts of China, parts of the Middle East, agriculture isn't all the vertical farming, drone deployment of fertilizers, mechanized harvesters and weeders that you would see on some of the news channels. In the areas where we work, outside of these richer areas, it's mainly manual, run off of Excel sheets, if that, lacking basic traceability, knowing where food comes from, no real transparency in end-to-end supply chain. So for us, inclusion is really about making these cutting-edge technologies that we have in richer nations, like the machine learning and remote sensing-driven weather forecast model and big data, widely accessible to those on the front lines of climate change, like farmers, agribusinesses, and their supply chain stakeholders. For us, it's about finding new business models and distribution channels that work for smallholder farmers, that work for ag SMEs, that work for input distributors and other stakeholders. It's about meeting the customers where they are. If they don't have a smartphone, design for SMS and other channels. If they can't pay for a large upfront payment, break it down into other models. So with that, very much looking forward to hearing from the other panelists. Thank you.
Granular perspective in terms, thank you very much for bringing a bit of a granular perspective in terms of the way your product is designed, your business model. Now I turn to Ms. Camille Poutois, CEO of Business for Inclusive Growth, for your introductory remarks.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me and BCtA to this exciting panel. BCtA is a coalition of corporations fighting against inequality, partnering with the OECD and governments, and I will elaborate on that later. And our objective is to scale up business actions on inequality. The idea of scaling up is something that Christian mentioned, and I think it will be a key point in our discussion today, because we can innovate, but the next step that is crucial, that is critical, is how to scale up. So we work, major companies that are European, American, and Japanese companies in the coalition work together to fight against inequality in their own operations, and which is very, very important in their supply chains. And corporations, major companies have a great responsibility. they have to embark, to support, to help their supply chains, their providers, their suppliers, and they have a role to play in this. Our objective is to put the S at the same level of the E. Social issues at the same level as environmental issues. And what is very interesting, I think, at the beginning, so we decided to focus on social issues. And the more we advance, the more we address in the same time environmental issues. And I will be happy to elaborate on that. If we want to address social issues, if we want to tackle social problems, we have to take into account the impact of corporate climate policies. And when we address social issues very quickly, not on all the topics, but on more and more topics, we have to take into account environmental issues and climate, biodiversity, etc. So it's very, very important. And I will wrap up saying two things. First, and I hope we will have time to share views on that, innovating. We have to innovate. It's complex, and we have to find new solutions. And reason why we have to work collectively. And so I'm so happy that there are more and more coalitions, business organizations, public-private partnerships on these topics, because we need to act together. And this will be very, very important, and even more if we have to address, to fix in the same time, at the same time, social and environmental issues.
Thank you very much. As we think about the SDGs, we have to look at it in an integrated fashion. This is how we think at UNDP. You have the social, you have the environmental, you have the governance, all these elements come together. In this context, we're very honored to have His Excellency, Mr. Sophung Heng, the State Secretary of Cambodia, for your introductory remark. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Christine, for the introduction, and also thanks to Saba for your facilitations. Of course, today it's very honored to participate in this inclusive business for people and planets, of course. And great evening from Cambodia. As you may know that within this COVID-19 pandemics era, that affect to more than 230 million of population around the globe. And among them, 4.7 million passed away. First, please allow me to share my heartfelt condolence to the life lost by these pandemics, and my great sympathy to the livelihoods of humanity hardly affected in such economic crisis time. Of course, from this moment, we had to share and science again together on a new pathway, especially we call it a new normal on how we can recover from this COVID-19, and especially for those who are affected the most are the vulnerable groups or poor and low-income people who earn just at the below of the pyramid, a common social issue faced by the developing nation around this world. Cambodia, in the same way, we envisage a correlation of the role of inclusive business as a means to find solutions during this post-COVID-19 recoveries, as well as a common social issue like the climate change, that the private sector and development partners also play a very crucial role to deliver such a huge impact solution. Outside this, the inclusive business, those promote systematic change. The intention is clear from its objective with the engagement of the BOP into the value chains and provide better access to affordable products and services. It is quite reasonable to our country that a new paradigm shall be explored to streamline the achievement of our nation vision. So with ASEAN initiative in in-depth analysis and a survey landscape study on inclusive business in Cambodia, we have foreseen that the potential impact IB could make in the short to medium term. To encourage more IB practices, we take the policies approach attentively through the various actions. And as the current progress, we have been speeding up in our country. Let's check on the draft inclusive business enabling environment for Cambodia. We call like the IBEEC, and it's a 3-year rolling action plan This will take another few months to get it officially launched by our government. Perhaps it is not interference. In the official launch, we'll definitely promote the IB practice and provide a clear framework to enable better and attractive environment for more enterprises, including impact investors, and double the impact similar to our current study from various IB companies. And recently, we have the accredited the 18 companies as IB model. As last month, as we have said that about the 18 company has been accredited as a company with IB business line. And we do hope that within this 18 company is expected to be 123 million US dollar. And this figure out expected to increase by 100% to about 270 million US dollar by 2025. That's showing their tremendous impact to Cambodia. So the spirit of this inclusive business, we optimistic that to establish an ecosystem that will a resilient and inclusive society with vibrant economic growth and contribute to the Cambodian sustainable development goals in the poverty reductions. Anyways, I would like to seek more cooperation also from our development partners, investors, and partners here to join us in IB endeavor. Together, we could end poverty by 2030 and also leave no one behind. Thank you so much.
Very much. Thank you very much for these comments. I would like to ask Ms. Susan Olson, Operation Officer at the Asian Development Bank, for her comments.
Thanks, Sava. And I'll be brief about myself. I am an senior investment specialist in ADB's private sector department. And for those who don't know, the Asian Development Bank, it is a development finance institution. So I stress those two words because I'm coming at this from an investor's perspective. If you work for a development finance institution, you are looking to finance and invest. And so if you're also looking for positive social impact and development, inclusive business is an important part of what we do, trying to support private companies to scale the business models. We're going to talk a lot about numbers, I think, in our session. The importance of scale of reaching low-income populations because of the size, 4.5 billion on the planet, that are the target market for inclusive business models. And we do deploy hundreds of millions of dollars annually from our own balance sheet, investing in inclusive business models. But especially interested in the discussion and very honored to have been part of the working group to develop the inclusive business principles that you were describing at the outset, Christian, because it's important that we approach this from all perspectives. We can't crowd in mainstream capital to invest if the companies aren't investing themselves in creating and innovating the inclusive business models. And if you don't have some of the other elements, government policies and other ecosystem partners to enable the scaling of inclusive business models. So looking forward to the discussion because we do have an interesting cross-section of the stakeholders on the panel. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. To kick off the first round of questions, Andrew, I mean, you have a lot of experience in developing these product and solution at the nexus of poverty and climate change mitigation. So how do you see the role of, you alluded to it at the beginning, can you more elaborate in terms of the role that you see in the promotion of such solutions, green and sustainable solutions? Thank you.
Yeah, I think it gets at a lot of the points my other fellow panelists were describing. It's about intentionality and bringing those solutions to low-income populations and also innovating in those areas. So Ignatia's role is really in helping to drive climate-smart agriculture as a member of the ag-tech ecosystem. So we're looking at agricultural technologies. We are one part of that as being a weather forecast provider and a decision support tool provider, but there are others that are developing crop and disease predictive models, precision ag platforms. All of those are going to be catalysts for green growth and in building climate resilience. And our role in the private sector is really to innovate and then to partner with those to make sure that there's distribution to really hard to reach areas or areas in the last mile. We also view our role in building awareness around the challenges of ag tech adoption. We're lacking fundamentals in sub-Saharan Africa around traceability, where the food is coming from. There's really weak smartphone penetration rates in some countries that are preventing these types of agricultural technologies from enabling the types of green revolution that we saw in China be one that we see in Africa or other parts of the world, or just simply lacking basic extension services. So in addition to building awareness around these challenges, we also want to take a more active role in co-designing new advisory services with other agribusiness partners to address real farmer challenges like the shifting pest and disease problems brought on by climate change, or to ensure crop input optimization, where we're not just overusing agrochemicals, we're looking at more integrated pest management and really looking at intensive productivity gains, but minimizing wastage. So through these types of partnerships, we view that as our role as a small but growing social enterprise in this space.
This segues nicely into for Camille Couture. I mean, when you look at your pledge, the idea of making the green recovery work for jobs, income, and growth, how have you seen inclusive business as being this connector of social and environmental resiliency and recovery?
Thank you for asking. In different ways, in fact, and as I said, the more we are moving forward in the journey towards a more inclusive growth, the more we address the more we address social and environmental issues together. We bundle both issues. And for example, we decided to work on just the concept and actions related to just transition. That is the social impact of climate policy. And our objective is to turn decarbonization into an opportunity through good jobs and a more inclusive economy. And we want to support, to accompany all the stakeholders impacted by climate change and climate change policy, focusing, of course, on corporate policies that may be negatively impacted from a social aspect by these policies. So we are working. So first, we decided, we say when corporations develop and implement corporate policy, net zero commitments, etc., it's great, but it's not enough. They also have to take into account the social impacts of their policy. They have to assess it, and they have to decide how they can address it. Partnering with the governments, of course. As I said, the coalition partners with the OECD and governments, and for us it's very important, and on this topic it's even more important. So at least assessing the social impact of what you are doing, then defining a roadmap and where corporations have to play a role, have to take their part. So just transition is now a major work stream for the coalition. And in the coalition, there is an incubator that is one of the pillars of the coalition. And what is very interesting is we have more and more projects that address both issues. And for example, we have several projects related to inclusive recycling. And it's very, very important because there is today an informal economy around recycling, and if we want to professionalize the people who are in charge of in fact vulnerable people who intervene in this sector, we have to have specific policies to support them. So, for example, in South Africa, we are helping waste pickers to involve them in the process, and so that they will be part, they will be really part of the inclusive, of the recycling recycling economy, recycling process that major companies are building, and that in fact the risk is that corporations, when they want to build recycling policies, they get rid of vulnerable people, of informal economy. No, we have to take them into account. Just an example, but as you know, in some countries, it's very, very important. And we have other projects related to climate insurance for vulnerable people, etc. So for us, it's key. A big work stream focusing on just transition, and several projects within the incubator making the link between social and environmental issues, so that vulnerable people will not be negatively impacted by climate change.
Thank you very much. Great, thank you very much. I think this really segues also nicely into the policy agenda. I mean, Your Excellency, Mr. Sokhum Heng, I mean, Cambodia has taken the lead in ASEAN to implement the guidelines for the promotion of IB in ASEAN, and you have developed your own country strategy for IB promotion. Can you elaborate and tell us more about this?
Thank you so Saba for these important questions. Of course, I need to share a bit about IB agenda that has been endorsed by our ministers, who has tasked a dedicated team to accelerate this process to bring forward the draft of this IBC strategy to become one of the government key policies in Cambodia. In 2019, during the ASME meeting, we as ASEAN member has agreed on joining with the IBAN to develop the ASEAN IB guideline that as a guiding document with 11 policy instruments to promote the IBs at the national level. And one is policy instruments on creating the synergy to promote the IB in ASEAN regions and beyond, to promote the IB at the regional level. At the country level, we have a three-step process consisting of: one is the scoping landscape and strategy recommendation development in public and private engagement. Two is the consultation, awareness building and promotions through the public-private dialogue. And three, steering technical assistance and strategy implementations. As a focal person at policy level, allow me to thank also the ideal support by IBAN for translating the Cambodian ASEAN IB policy guideline into Khmer language, and the document serve even better in our continued effort on the IB development. For Cambodia, even though it may take time for the draft of the IBC strategy to adapt it officially as the national policy, some of the 8 recommendations of the IB strategy has been attended to including institutional structure. The first IB accreditation, IB discussion with various key partners, including government line ministry, business association, development partners, accelerator, and impact investor, and joining various events, including IB ASEAN Summit. And most importantly, we found a parallel interest from all stakeholders on our proposal, including the request of technical assistance facility, risk reduction scheme, and tax incentives and public procurement. In addition, from the experience of our exposures of the first IB forums in Cambodia back in 2019, we continue to bring forward various IB events virtually, while IB website has been added to the webpage of the Ministry of Industry, Science, Technologies and Innovation, with plan to link to the partner media. And of course, yesterday we have joined the fourth of the ASEAN IB Summit, and we also gonna be hosting the ASEAN 5th IB Summit in Cambodia, as we are the chair of the ASEAN within the next year in 2022. So thank you so much for the question.
Thank you very much. It's such an exciting year. I mean, next year to have you under the leadership of Cambodia to have this work undertaken. And in this context, I would like to hear from Ms. Susan Olsen from the Asian Development Bank. You've been part of the working group that defined the 4 features of the inclusive business. You have been a pioneer in the inclusive business space. What value do these features bring to investors and multilateral development banks?
Yeah, thanks, Sefa. And I hope that other investors will find it as useful as we do as a guide to help channel a little bit more in, and I'm going to use the first word from one of the features. I'm going back to some of the comments that Christian made at the outset in launching the principles, but it's core for investors, and I'm talking about the broader spectrum of impact investors or ESG investors, sustainability-linked, SDG-aligned investors. I mean, we're talking about a lot of capital. I think the last study I saw, they tried to measure how much capital is focused on impact. It's over, 2.2 trillion. And that can represent, capital markets, private debt, PE, sort of private equity, venture capital. But within that massive spectrum of capital that can be deployed, for those who are looking, as we are in the development finance institution space, at social impact, then that is first and foremost, I guess, what these features can help you do, is determine when you're assessing a business model. Is it IB? Is it inclusive business? And does it focus on the social impact for a specific segment? So we are talking about BOP, base of the pyramid. I guess we've used it enough times during the panel that can be synonymous with low income. Understanding that the purpose of the business model intentionally tries to serve this segment with new products, with new services that are more affordable, still quality, engaging somehow as producers, suppliers. There's a range of roles that people can play in the business models, depending on whether you're in the health, education, agribusiness, financial services spectrum, and where you see the BOP as borrowers, micro small businesses, or borrowers for affordable housing products. But first and foremost, understanding what aspect of the business model is focused on the segment, so that you can, follow the track of inclusive business investing. We're talking about business and we're talking about investments. So there needs to be a clear financial return, right? I mean, in a perfect world, there shouldn't be any difference in the financial return between a non-IB business and an IB business, because we are trying to, through some of the work being done by BCtA and companies thinking about how to grow. I mean, it's a business strategy. You've got to serve low-income markets if you're going to grow at all, right? We know the mid and the top of the pyramids are pretty saturated in most respects in terms of being served by products and services, or the market segments are very crowded. So looking for that path to profitability in the financial model as an investor is key, because this is business. So there needs to be commercial return. Recognizing that it may not be immediate. I mean, there's a role for patient capital in inclusive business investing. There's a role also for sort of non-traditional partnerships. I mean, it's really interesting to see the spectrum of sort of venture philanthropy or foundations who are looking to be very strategic in the use of more philanthropic capital that they have in ways that catalyzes and crowds in more private market investment. And you can do that through, first loss structures, de-risking. There are a number of ways to play with a financial model in the early days of the business scaling, to overcome some of the innovation costs and hurdles in overcoming higher operational costs, potentially trying to serve a new low-income segment. But looking for commercial returns in the medium and long term is the same. It needs to be the same as you would if you were looking at any other kind of business. And there's very closely linked, that's really kind of the other side of the coin, right? To financial viability is the concept of scale and replicability that others have already mentioned. We are talking about the majority on the planet that are low income. That was the case before COVID. We all know it's even more the case because of the impact that the pandemic has had disproportionately on low income segments. So understanding, again, how to get the numbers. There's a perception, I think it might be an outdated one, that inclusive business models are low margin, high scale. That's not necessarily the case if you're trying to serve a segment in a differentiated way or with a value proposition that can be more complex because you're reaching underserved markets. There has to be use, and I think that's coming clear out of the pandemic as well, potential for technology to scale and lower some of those operational costs. Again, thinking of non-traditional ways to partner, mainstream banks, mainstream corporates partnering with non-government entities or other non-traditional partners for their distribution to be able to reach those last mile networks in ways that maybe isn't core business for their other non-IB models, but the scale needs to be there. And I guess the last feature, just to recap, is, and maybe it goes without saying, that if you're an impact investor, you're focusing on investing in inclusive business, you've got to have a framework that's designed upfront to decide how you're going to measure the impact. And usually when you're talking about inclusive business, you're looking for the people, right? Who are the low income, the BOP people who are served by the model. So you can at least, count. It's a lot of quantitative work. How many people? That's usually the metric people are looking for, so that you can add that social return as well to your financial return. Lots of debates probably for another panel on how to measure the qualitative benefit for low-income people through inclusive business. But at the very least, measuring positive impact for that segment also needs to be a key feature. And it's definitely what the development finance institutions look for, but I think a lot of mainstream capital investors are looking for it too. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I think that from a perspective of business, Andrew, when you think about investors, and given that your product is really looking at both the environmental and social, how have you found sort of the business receptivity around these kinds of product innovations that focus both on the BOP with the environmental also sort of focus?
Yeah, I think, and Susan raised some great points about, how we think about, I think an older way of thinking about it was, there are trade-offs to reaching customers in the BOP, and it is a low margin, high scale business. But in fact, it's really about demonstrating value to segments, I think, that have been largely ignored by the private sector and by others. And so for us, when we're looking at E and S and ESG, we design products and services that drive environmental and social impact for customers. And it's not to say it's easy. It requires some business model innovation, requires a ton of iteration, and that didn't work. Let's move on to something else. I mean, one of our key products took over 120 different trials for us to get it right before it was actually adopted by farmers in Ghana, where we launched. But there's really two main points I wanted to make around ESG or E and S from Ignitia's operations. It's innovating and scaling those products that do good for the environment. So if you equip a large farm with accumulated rainfall, they can reduce water wastage in their irrigation systems, or helping to develop new spray and fertilizer application windows according to certain weather parameters. You could reduce agrochemical overuse and start encouraging more integrated pest management solutions, or even just basic things like reducing soil compaction by timing tractor operations to weather parameters. So that's on the product side and the environmental side. But then on the social side, it is about access. How do you get these tools that we take for granted, like basic weather forecasts or advisory messages, like when to plant, when to harvest, when to apply fertilizer? How do you get those into the hands of smallholder farmers or harder to reach market segments? And here, it's like I'm saying, it's about this business model innovation. It's about the flexibility and understanding that not everybody can go it alone. And sometimes it requires some really creative partnerships with other agribusinesses or other ag tech platforms in order to deliver value to those farmers or to that customer segment. And being in this position as a social enterprise, even for the SMS service, you'll know rather quickly if a smallholder farmer is willing to pay for your service, whether or not it adds value. Monitoring the churn rate, monitoring the net promoter score, monitoring some of these key metrics will let you know if their hard-earned cash is being spent wisely. They'll tell you. So I think there's a lot of exciting things happening in the ag tech sector, and really glad we're able to shed some light on that during this session.
Thank you. I mean, it's quite clear that the acid test of value is there with the customers, and the replication of these products is very much contingent on the need, the demand, but also the local context. In this, I would like to ask Camille, the B4IG incubator has selected its first cohorts of 12 projects where you aim to advance inclusive growth on a local micro level. How can the lessons learned of these projects be replicated beyond where you have selected to a different scale? Thank you.
Thank you, Saba. The key findings, very quickly. I will use the same words as the other participants in this panel: innovating, scaling up. Finding, I don't know if everyone will agree with me, but finding innovative projects, early stage projects, concept stage projects that are innovative is not so difficult. The B4IG incubator is, so we had 12 projects last year, 10 projects this year. The projects are proposed by member companies, partnering with NGOs, etc. And there is a great momentum on these topics today. And so there are many people, many brilliant people who work on these topics. And so we have many, many innovative propositions. And so it's very interesting. The question is, so of course we have to support them, and the role of the incubator is to help them shift from early stage to a more advanced stage to be prepared to scale up. But the key question is how to scale up. And I would like to share with you, and would be happy to discuss this further, the key findings. It's not so easy to scale up, as we all know, and it will depend on several things. First, impact measurement. It is, if we want to scale up, we have to measure and to prove, to show the impact of what we have done, and it's not so easy. I will not elaborate on impact measurement methodology, etc. It will take another panel, but it's key. If we want to scale up, we have to measure. Second, we have to partner. Even big corporations have to partner with NGOs, government, etc. But above all, in the yes, NGOs and local partners. And what is very, very important, social innovation should be at the core of the organizations, which is not always the case. Environmental innovation is more and more at the core of companies, of corporations, and social innovation. Maybe we have to make progress on this. And when social innovation is at the core of organizations, then we can showcase the progresses made by innovative projects, and then we can start working on how to scale up and how to fund the project to help the project scale up. So the 4 key findings: impact measurement, of course, very important, partnership, but above all, 3 key findings, but above all, putting social innovation at the core of organizations, corporations.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, Mr. Sopong Heng, I mean, inclusive business solutions are focused on generating impact for people at the base of the pyramid. Some of these business lines and sector are around environmental issues. Can you give us some examples from your first round of IB credit accreditation of such types of businesses that also address environmental issues?
Yeah, you are right, Staba. Of course, as IB, even it make the triple win for the government, for the entrepreneurs, and of course for the people. But actually, the IB solution are particularly for our people, for the BOP. In our IB accreditation system, company can only be accredited if they adhere to environment, social, and governance standard, the ESG. In addition, the company that has specific environmental or climate impact get additional points in our scoring. While the emphasis with IB is on generating scale up the meaningful social impact for the BOP, the business solution may also address climate change at the same time. For example, we have a company accredited as IB that sponsor very interesting solution for cooking and electrical energy. Another example is a company in the water field addressing a water supply in remote area by providing last mile connection, or a company in housing which innovated on brick technology that also create a climate in the house. These are all solution creating double win for the poor and for the environment. We hope to find more such company for the succeeding IB accreditation rounds, and perhaps even more innovative ones. But I'd like to emphasize that the focus of the IB remains the solution for the poor and low-income people, and not all companies have to have combined social and environmental impact objectives. Most IB companies do not harm to the environment, but there is a little scope to address climate goals. So thank you.
And thank you very much. And Susan, from your perspective of sitting at the ADB, how do you see the IB features and the work can channel investment for businesses that promote green and inclusive recovery? And what kinds of incentive systems do we need to have more funding channeling towards inclusive business?
Yeah, I'll get to the incentives in a minute, but I think it's important to mention that when you're talking about inclusive business focused on a segment that by definition is low income, we're talking about a segment that's the least able to face any disruption from climate risk, right? Whether it's weather events or shocks that affect crops, or disruption that affects settlements, informal settlements, because of lack of quality, affordable housing. So it's another lens that has to be applied. I mean, on the principle that you need to do positive good, and looking first and foremost for the segment and the positive social impact. Also in embedding and understanding how the environmental risks are being controlled for, right? So if you're investing in an affordable housing project, I mean, is there any kind of potential for green certification, climate risk assessment that's being done before the housing is being constructed to make sure that it's resilient to some of the climate risks that are known for that climate? Same thing in small producer agriculture. If you're going to invest in value chain, supply chain projects that link small farmers to increased manufacturing capacity, agribusiness capacity, is there any thought being given to how to make those farmers more climate resilient and adapt their crops and their planting techniques to the climate risks that are known for the region, for the crop that they're producing? And there are incentives out there. There's a lot of money within that impact money that I was describing earlier. There's a lot of tools. There's a lot of money that can be deployed to blended finance, or tools that can be used to help de-risk and incentivize more investment in that nexus intersection. Social impact, first and foremost for the segment, but also making sure that the environmental risks are identified and solved for somehow through features of the inclusive business model.
Picture, one of the things we've seen is, from a business perspective, environmental, water risks, climate risk are very much high on the agenda of businesses. There was a recent report where 70% of them see that as an issue, but inequality is as 18%. But we know this is really an opportunity that we have to look at, and in that context, I think the policy agenda needs to clearly provide the right incentive system to enable these kinds of products and services that enable the poor to become more resilient, but also enable businesses to engage with the BCtA pyramid. In this context, I hand over to Christian for his final remarks, and thank again all of our wonderful panel, Andrew, Camille, His Excellency, Mr. Sopung, Susan, for this rich conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Saba, and thank you to all the panelists, which I think we really had a great discussion, and there's a bit of a challenge to summarize really now the main points, and especially if that is a bit of disadvantage with this online media. You don't actually know who is sitting in the audience. So otherwise you could tailor-made it a little bit more. But I was informed that we have a lot of questions actually that came into the chat, and I was also informed that we will take note of that and address it as much as possible individually. We just don't have enough time right now to do so, but you can be sure it will be addressed. Now, what I could hear really in the discussion was that very often it came out, and not really to a big surprise, the role of partnership. And that is on the private sector. Andrew mentioned that, Camille mentioned that on the government side. I mean, I think this is really one of the core features. It is clear that without partnering, co-developing new products, it will be very difficult, not only for inclusive businesses, but also in general. But this is, on a personal level, this is really one of the main reasons what I got attracted to 6 years ago when I started to enter this field of inclusive business, because it's really a more comprehensive approach where you see the benefits on both sides, or as His Excellency also just brought it up towards the end, we have this triple win effect. It's not only good for the business, it's not only good for the poor because they have improved livelihood, it's also good for the government. They have less social expenditure and also a higher tax revenue, for example. So it's really a triple win, and that's the nice thing with inclusive business. What was also pointed out is really the importance and role inclusive business can play now really to mitigate the climate impact, what we see. And the other important part was mentioned is innovation, innovation, and scaling and scaling. I mean, the challenges what we see there, and at the same time, the need for these features, and especially as it was mentioned, it doesn't help much if we have a lot of nice little individual startups that innovate great products, if at the end of the day we cannot scale them and achieve higher and faster impact. And towards the end, it was also clearly made the statement that actually there is enough money available also for blended finance mechanism. That is something that I find personally also very important to de-risk also for impact investors, but also to find new ways how government and private sector and finance institution can actually work together, especially also from the donor's perspective. This is something which I really find very rewarding, and look into it also from the IBAN perspective on how we can contribute there and what we can develop that for the next phase. And having said that, it's always a bit of feeling of course, sitting on a panel, I have the feeling you talk to the converted, and it's nice to exchange these ideas and we agree on the importance of these things. Again, we don't see who's sitting in the audience, but I hope we could reach also some of the non-converted, how to say, the one maybe who heard the inclusive business about the first time and are a bit more encouraged now to look into the potential that inclusive business have in various aspects. We also hope, of course, that the IB features could contribute to that. And there I would just like to mention at the end then also the IB features. I think it was placed in the chat that I could not see at the moment, but there should have been the chat, the link to it. The working group that developed that would be happy to receive any feedback on that. And if you follow the link, you will have also the two names listed there, which is Pedro from UNDP and Marcus from IBAN, who you can write to and send in your comments. So having said that, again, thank you all, Your Excellency, your distinguished panelists, and the audience for listening to us. And you can now look forward, let me check, to the next event that is coming up, which is the name of Reclaiming Innovation, Government-Led Innovation Through Private Sector Partnership. I think they are up in half an hour, so you would have a 30 minutes break if my schedule here is correct. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christian.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.